Good day, everyone, and welcome to this session in the Evidence for Climate Action series here at the COP. I am Noomi Östlund at the Swedish Expert Group for Aid Studies, EBA. I'm delighted to moderate today's discussion on the topic that sits at the critical intersection of climate ambition and political reality. The core mandate of this COP is clear: to radically accelerate the global transition to a low carbon future. This requires all nations to reduce reliance on fossil fuels. The most common and effective tool for this is price signals, like carbon taxes and the removal of fossil fuel subsidies. But as we know from painful experience around the world, such reforms often come at a political price. The moment a policy touches the citizens' pockets, the risk of opposition, protest, and political failure skyrockets. This highlights a critical knowledge gap. While we have many studies on public opinion on climate policy in OECD countries, we have fewer focusing on Africa. How can governments and their development partners pursue effective, equitable policies without understanding public perception, especially in contexts where institutional distrust and poverty are widespread? This is precisely why EBA commissioned a report on this topic. The central finding from this rigorous study across Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda is a crucial lesson for all of us here at COP. Public support for carbon pricing is modest, but it can be enhanced. In fact, more than doubled by explicitly stating how revenue will be used. Furthermore, the research reveals a strong public preference for allocating this revenue, not just towards short-term relief, but to long-term investments in public goods. The report's implications are profound, especially when viewed against the backdrop of recent protests and economic anxieties in the region. And to unpack this evidence, we're honored to have with us one of the report authors, Dr. Daniel Slunge from Gothenburg University, to present the findings, followed by a discussion with our distinguished discussant, Professor Richard Mulva from the University of Nairobi, who will offer some critical perspectives on the policy implications. With that said, if you have questions as a spectator, please share those in the chat and we'll try to pick them up along the session. And with that, Daniel, please, I'll leave the floor to you.
Thanks a lot, Noomi, and thanks also to the organizers for inviting us to make this presentation. So this report is not my work alone, but it's with the co-authors here at the University of Gothenburg and University of Jönköping, and it has also greatly benefited from a collaboration with researchers in East Africa and public agencies in East Africa as part of a capacity development program on green economy. Noomi, thanks for summarizing our report so gently. I think I can skip this background. Perhaps just say as a motivation, although that emission per capita is of course extremely low in East Africa, it's still kind of an instrument, carbon pricing, etc., that is used under a different label. Fuel taxes play a big role for revenue generation in these countries. And also in the NDCs, there are plans to decrease emission from transports at the same time as you have a rapid growth, population growth, and also economic growth, which then necessitates some kind of policy instruments. So that is another issue I just wanted to touch on. This is also a relevant issue in these countries. So let me move on to the research questions. We ask 4 questions in the study. Is there public support for carbon pricing in Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda? How does specifying the use of revenue impact public support for carbon pricing? What are the preferences for different aspects of revenue use from carbon pricing? Here we're interested in temporal aspects, like do people prefer that revenues are used for long-term investments or short-term expenditures? and if people prefer private goods such as cash transfers to investments in public goods such as public transport. And finally, as Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda suffer from very high levels of corruption, we are also interested in how institutional distrust impact the preferences for the allocation of revenue generated from carbon pricing. We conducted 2 population surveys, each covering around 900 respondents in each of the 3 countries. Both surveys were conducted by teams of professional interviewers via computer-assisted telephone interviews. And it's important to note that respondents are generally more educated and more urban than the general population, which is common in these type of survey-based studies in these countries. So let's now look at the results, starting with public support for carbon pricing. We asked the respondents about their opinions on increasing the price on fossil fuels by introducing a tax and reducing subsidies, and they could answer on a 5-graded scale from strongly against to strongly in favor. And as you can see here, our findings indicate an average support of 29% for fossil fuel taxes and 33% for fossil fuel subsidy reductions. Interestingly, this aligns closely with some European studies reporting around 30+ average support in 23 European countries. However, we see significant variations across the 3 countries, with lower support for both the tax and the subsidy reduction in Kenya compared to Tanzania and Uganda. We also see that a substantial majority of respondents in Kenya, I think around 70+ percentage in both for tax and subsidy reduction, are strongly opposed to this price-based policy instrument, as you can see by these red and orange bars or red bars. Okay, so we moved on and asked the same questions about opinion on these instruments, but stated that revenues would be used for better schools, infrastructure, social programs, or environmental restoration. And when specifying revenue use, the share stating they're in favor of these instruments increased significantly. You can see there is some variation between the countries in which type of program they favor. But this positive link between specifying revenue use and climate policy support is in line with findings from other studies, and not least a recent meta-analysis of other surveys based or on this topic. So revenue, specifying revenue increased support significantly. So after that, we decided to explore preferences for revenue use more closely. And in the subsequent survey we conducted, we asked respondents to allocate the revenue generated from carbon pricing. That's hypothetically generated revenue, and we asked them to allocate that across 3 different alternatives. And these alternatives were designed so it forced respondents to make trade-offs between long-term investments and short-term financing in public transports, and between receiving a cash transfer to the household and investments in public goods. And as you can see from the dark brown bars, we found a substantial support for allocating revenues to long-term investments. On average, in the 3 countries, 38% of the budget was dedicated to these long-term infrastructural investments, compared to 28% for short-term financing and 34% for direct cash transfers to households. Despite residing in countries suffering from corruption and relatively poor countries, a substantial portion of the population expresses support for allocating climate policy revenue to long-term investments over short-term financing. and also then to public goods over private goods, these cash transfers, in the context of public transports. That's how we framed the questions. The last research question, and the role of distrust and public support. We found that distrust, both in others and in government institutions, diminishes public support for carbon pricing instruments. That also resonates with studies from other contexts. Distrust is also significantly associated with lower support for allocating revenues to long-term investments and public goods in Kenya and Uganda. This was not a significant association in Tanzania. So there are some differences here. The results underscore the important role of trust in influencing public acceptance of carbon pricing instruments, also in the East African context. But as we find significant variations in these institutional trust variables and also this trust in others, the general trust question, I think this area would be particularly interesting to explore further. And as I said earlier, the results I presented should be interpreted cautiously, as our sample are skewed towards the more urban and educated parts of the population. And it's also based on stated preferences, which can introduce some biases. Nevertheless, I would like to end on a somewhat positive note, saying that our results suggest that even in corruption-affected East African countries, the support for carbon pricing is on par with that in European countries, and there is substantial support for investments in long-term infrastructure and public goods. And we identify three broad ways to enhance support. First, to that revenue recycling, especially then to programs with social benefits, making that explicit can increase support. We also find a significant association with education and support. So education and information can be used to increase awareness, and then measures that increase institutional trust. So if you would like to read the report, you can download it through this QR code. So I think I'll stop there and be happy to discuss this further. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Daniel. Yes, I really recommend reading the report. I've also put a link to the report in the chat for everyone. But thank you, Daniel, for that. And with that, I'd like to hand over to you, Richard, for some comments and a start to a discussion on this topic.
Yes, thank you very much, Numi. Thank you, Daniel, for your presentation, and also thank you, the organizers, for giving us this opportunity to present our report. Now, of course, Daniel has presented critical issues. You realize that this research or the data were collected between 2022 and 2023, and in 2024, we had the riots in Kenya that were connected to similar proposals. And you can see the acceptability of this, or the support of these policy instruments. And both of them, whether it's tax increment or reduction in subsidy, they have the same impact, which is to increase the price. And the moment you increase the price of fuels, the economy is, all the sectors of the economy are somehow interconnected with fuel. So this is going to have a ripple effect on even the prices of commodities, basic commodities. So that would mean that these are also going to increase. So, and perhaps this is why you see the kind of support being quite low. The other thing is the need to explicitly specify what the revenue is going to be used for. Daniel has just said that the moment you specify and tell people this is what we are going to use this revenue for, it's going to double the support. And this is very important, especially for policymakers. Before we implement any policy, it's important to get to know the stakeholders that are going to be affected and make sure that they are aware. You move together with the people, as opposed to a situation where the government wakes up one morning and says that we are going to have this particular policy, you're going to leave many people behind. Then what was also interesting is, as Daniel said, you'd expect many people would say that, okay, any savings that are made from these particular policies, can we have money transferred directly to our pockets? But people are saying, no, we would like to see investment in long-term programs, social programs, and education, which is a positive thing. Maybe people are viewing long-term impacts other than utilizing this money almost immediately and consuming it immediately. So this was a very interesting result, which comes in the heels of distrust of people and government. I think this is what was happening in Kenya last year. Many people were not really trusting what the government was telling them. And that's why maybe alongside not being carried along or told what is it that we are going to use this money for, many people had to riot because they were not trusting what the government was telling them. So it's important. And I think this work has come at a very critical point. Maybe it should be circulated widely to even policymakers in this country. And we try to share it widely and demonstrate the importance of carrying people along when we are making policies. So thank you very much, Numi. I will stop there, and then we can proceed with the discussion.
Thanks a lot, Richard, and thank you for. It's interesting that you underline the potential in this in these findings. But I would like to maybe then start with a critical question for both of you. And Daniel, in your presentation, you highlighted that the result of the survey may be skewed because the respondents were mainly found in urban areas, mainly well-educated. Do you think you would see a different result if we instead asked mainly rural parts of the population? Could the results in the study be influenced by people in large cities with constant traffic jams, being fed up with air pollution and negative health effects? Would they be more positive to carbon pricing and financing these types of public goods than a rural population? Should I put this, Daniel, would you like to start, or maybe then Richard, you could comment as well?
Sure, I can start. I mean, we do know that, as we showed also in the study, that education is significantly associated with support, and education levels are higher in cities. And we also know that the contexts are different. As you said, you can be stuck up in traffic jams, etc. And maybe people in cities also see co-benefits with local air pollution more clearly if you do something on taxing fuels, etc. So I do think there could be some differences if we had a more representative sample, but we don't really know.
Richard, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, Daniel is right. But then if you tell people or you inform them about what you're about to do, and then you walk them through the impacts of this particular policy, and it touches on increment of prices of basic commodities, I'm sure many people are not going to agree, especially in the rural area. But as Daniel says, I think this is a study that needs to be done. There could be differences because the two groups of people maybe are affected differently by the rise in taxes or reduction in subsidies if they were to be brought in. But the impact really is what is going to determine how these groups are going to react.
Yeah, thank you. And but then
I mean,
let me then,
we had also in the study questions on on where people lived, etc. So we didn't see that as a significant variable actually, if you were living in a rural or an urban area.
That's interesting. But then let me then bring the discussion over from representation in the study itself, but to the potential impact. Because Richard, you really highlight the potential here to have support for carbon pricing. And I mean, Daniel, the study shows that you can increase or you can influence support in a study. But do you think, how could you do that in a real environment? Is it information campaigns, or how would you actually bring this out to a population? And both of you have touched upon the question of trust and distrust. I mean, this is in this survey setting. How would you see this in the reality?
I think this is a bit of a $1 million question, right? I mean, sequencing of reforms, doing it gradually, be transparent, etc. Those are some kind of canned answers. I think this with compensating those losing out seems to be very important. And it is not necessarily that there are those losing out the most, but those that are also powerful or so-called veto players that you need to manage in these type of reform processes. Because if you have a transport fleet or something like that, you can create a lot of well, a lot of problems, even if you are not super many. But compensating different actors and getting them on board is probably very important. And then, well, the transparency around how you use resources, I suppose that's important. And perhaps also some policy packaging where you combine different types of measures that can appeal to a broader segment of the population. What do you think, Richard?
Yeah, I believe ideally the point on distrust is very critical here, because you've already demonstrated that if we are able to inform people and tell them that this is what we are going to do with or with the money that we collect from here, and if you've shown that people prefer long-term social programs like education. So you need to lay this information bare and tell people that we are doing this because we want to achieve this. If that is also followed through with a level of trust by people, then it's most likely is going to have very positive impact, as opposed to a situation where you just introduce a policy, you're not telling us what you're going to do with the money, we don't trust you, you're likely going to have a lot of pushback, as we've seen already, I think, here in Kenya.
Thank you, Richard. We have a comment from the audience. Arunjana Das, I think, sorry for the pronunciation, is asking, could institutional trust be alleviated by even a small fraction through, I mean, we've already touched, I think you touched upon it, transparency, but transparency campaigns, decentralized monitoring of resource use to communities through participatory mechanisms. Do you see what do you see the potential there?
I see a potential, but it's not, I think you need to be very careful in how you do this so that you do not kind of trigger people to think around corruption through corruption messaging, so to say. I know in most government offices in Kenya and other East African countries, it says this is a corruption-free zone, and then you start like, well, is it really? Why do you need this sign? And I mean, things can backfire through triggering people to think around. Okay, maybe this is not so uncorrupt. So you need to do this in the right ways. And then people talk about these injunctive norms, like knowing that other people are also against corruption and things like that. So there is a literature on this, and quite a few people trying to research on how you actually do this. But this is very difficult to change because you need a massive change among many actors and changing the norms, I think.
Richard, your take on this?
Yeah, I think trust and distrust, these are not things that happen overnight. They take a long time to build, to either trust or distrust someone or an institution. This is a process, and it's a process that comes through because either the social contract between the government and the people has not been fulfilled, and not just once, many times over. So trying to build that level of trust and bringing people back to a level where they can trust you, I think it's also going to take a long time. It's not an event where you're going to do campaigning. You need to demonstrate, maybe do it once, it succeeds, and then people now start building that trust. So whatever methodology you use, I'm sure it's not going to happen overnight.
Thank you, Richard. I would like to move the conversation over to a completely or a slightly different perspective of this with carbon pricing. I know there's the European Union working with a carbon border adjustment mechanism. So basically putting tariffs on goods with high fossil fuel contents. So do you see that as an opportunity or a risk? Because of course, for countries in Eastern Africa to want to trade with Europe, would there be an incentive to lower carbon in their products and be less fossil fuel dependent because they want to trade with Europe, or do you see it as a risk? It's a different motivator than the public opinion that we discussed, but what do you see there? Could that contribute to a strong public trust in this, or is it more a risk?
I'll leave that to you, Richard.
Okay, do I go first?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Numi. And again, you know, countries already have commitments towards the NDC, and Kenya is 32%, and they've already identified specific sectors in the economy, and each one of them has had specific commitments. So if you want to introduce another aspect and say that maybe to trade with EU, we are going to have you change this. Again, this might take time because it will require readjusting commitments in some sectors of the economy. But this is not to say that this cannot work. It has worked in agriculture, for example, with the minimum residues, especially for horticultural crops. If you want to sell your to trade with Europe for horticultural crops, then there are requirements that have to be met. So again, this has taken a lot of time. We've had a lot of misses and hits. So the same way, I think you could have this path, but it needs to be clearly thought out.
Thank you, Richard. Sorry, Richard, I'm going to step in. I realize we only have 30 minutes left of this panel. Time moves quickly. So I just want to thank you both, Dr. Daniel Slunge from Gothenburg University and Professor Richard Mulva from the University of Nairobi for this discussion. I see we also have further questions in the chat, but unfortunately, I think you need to reach out to our experts for further discussion. I'm sure they'll be delighted. And with this evidence, I hope this can inform negotiators at the COP30. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much. Thank you. We appreciate it.